G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder. Today, we're going to be having a look at one of the quality of life changes that I think Gaijin could add to the game that would increase the accuracy and the quality of life of the player base almost immediately. And it would be extremely cheap to implement, it wouldn't be difficult at all, and I would really like to see this just because it is one of those things that really is kind of necessary. Today we're going to be talking about the stat card, and I'm not talking about the player stat card, which has player statistics, because honestly, if you care about them in 2019, as in if you think it's life, then I'm sorry you have an issue. But if you are looking at the vehicle stat card, now you've got me talking. The vehicle stat card is probably one of the most misleading things in War Thunder. It's one of those things that says some information, but isn't really all that accurate all the time. It is accurate sometimes. So, for example, turret rotation speed and vertical guidance, that's pretty accurate, and that gives you a rough representation of roughly what you'll be achieving in that certain tank. But what we're going to do is we are going to talk about the ground forces first, then I think we'll move on to helicopters, and then finally aircraft. Aircraft is probably going to be the biggest one here. So, let's talk about the tank stat card. It currently displays a fair amount of data. Some of it, honestly, though, is kind of useless. I think hull armor, turret armor, and armor penetration is fairly useless. Most tanks have more than one shell type, and also when you get tanks with, multiple pieces of armor on, say, the turret front, it's going to sort of blow out that number. Not only that, but tanks with rounded turrets are going to have different values at certain points. So it's kind of pointless, to be honest. I don't really see a need, although it is kind of cool and it is kind of interesting. I'm not really going to say that it should be removed. I just don't think it's terribly useful. I think it is a little bit misleading as well. But the real kicker for me is with the speed. You see, most of the time when you're traveling at speed, you won't be hitting that maximum speed. For example, on the B1 Centauro, it's 110 kilometers per hour. I have never reached 110 kilometers per hour in my Centauro, even though I have literally put myself on a road on full dart in a downhill run. I have never gotten it. I've gotten close. I think I've gotten like 109 or 107 or something like that, but you need a lot of time to get to these top speeds, especially a downhill slope and preferably hard terrain. In War Thunder, speaking of terrain, there are 3 types of terrain. There is hard, medium, and soft, and each speed will be different when you compare it to each type of terrain. And so, here's my proposal. You set an engine power, whether that be maximum, whether that be whatever. It could be half, it could be a quarter, it could be CC gear 1, CC gear 2, CC gear 3. What I'm suggesting is that you are able to set the terrain, you are able to set the incline, and then see how it goes. And for example, you'll get a lot better reading when you do this. Some tanks might be better at climbing hills because they have different tracks. Some might be lighter, some might have a better weight distribution along the tracks. For example, wheeled vehicles have very poor weight distribution and are very slow in soft terrain. They'll sink into the sand or sink into the mud, whereas tanks will tend to sort of glide across because they spread that over the tank. Well, the thing is, if you have this, then you're able to gauge exactly what your tank is good at without even taking it into a test drive. And this is extremely important for new players because some of them will jump into their low-tier wheeled vehicles and they'll think, well, why am I going so slow? This thing says it can go 80 kilometers per hour. And that's exactly the point. The point here is to help out new players and to help out people who are perhaps starting a new grind on their next tech tree, or someone who's, grinding something out on patch day and they want to know exactly how the vehicle performs. I think this is the best way to do it. If there is a better way, I want to know in the comments, please. I would love to know, because this is one of the important things that I'd like to get through, because new players especially have a large learning curve to get through when they get into the game, and even more experienced players like myself would like a little bit more information when it comes to stat cards. So that's my main thing for the Centauro, or for any wheeled vehicle, is to know what it's like off-road. Because that's the most important part. You're going to be fighting most of the battles off-road. And so having a gauge of how well it performs would be really, really nice. So that's my proposal for ground forces. If you'd like to add on to that or adjust it, then I would greatly appreciate it. The next thing I'd like to talk about are the helicopters. Now, helicopters in Tanks RB are a little bit more of a utility than an actual sort of vehicle that you go out and do stuff with. It is more of a weapons platform. You rely more on the weapons than the actual performance of the vehicle, say its speed, or its turning capability, or its altitude performance, or its durability even. It's not really what you use it for. You mainly use it for the weapons. So, for example, the G-Lings. You use it for the Hellfires and the Stingers, and the thermals. Honestly, I think these are the most important parts of the vehicle. I think you should have the more information on the flares, for example. Flares are becoming more and more relevant in War Thunder, and with the advent of AIM-9, the AIM-9Ds, with the 16G overload, and the R60s in Air RB, it's only a matter of time before we get flares. And so, why not start with helicopters, who already have flares, and who already have automatic deployment of flares from a computer-based system, which I think is kind of cool, by the way. I should like to, honestly, I would like to see what a flare does, as in what the flare's effective distance is. So, for example, if there's an X generation missile at a certain range, what's it going to do? Is it going to distract the flare? Perhaps that could be something that is displayed on the missile itself, where you do already have the ECCM yes or no option, or on the stat card, which you might see in the video. I would like to see a little bit more. Perhaps it's got maybe a bit more information on the distance where the ECCM kicks in. Maybe it's got a sort of a range where it will go, nope, it's just not going to have any effect whatsoever. And I'd like to see a little bit more information in this regard, because this would affect the way that I play the vehicle. And for me, having information on this sort of stuff is incredibly important. Stuff like what range can the what range can the missiles go out to, which was recently added. I really like that. But on top of that, what about its range at sea level? What about its range at 1,000 meters? And what about its range at its maximum altitude? These are things that I would like to know, because the speed will be different. It's powered by a rocket propellant, and as we all know, rockets are way more efficient as the altitude increases, as you get a thinner atmosphere, because there's less drag. And so I would like to know what, for example, the cruise speed of the missile is. I'd like to know everything about it, as much as possible, because this will affect gameplay for everyone. This is something that can help the players sort of get into a situation where they know their vehicle better and are able to perform a little bit better, which is perfect for everyone. More RP, better, more competitive games, and overall a happier player base with a more knowledge base. So, one thing that I would also like to comment on about helicopters is the lack of everything else in the stat card on the... For example, the G-Lynx only has 4 things. I would like to see a little bit more. Maybe the type of thermals, maybe the type of radar, the avionics systems, the maximum range on the radar warning system. Things like this are going to start to be a bit more common in planes as well. And this is where we move on to aircraft. I would personally like to see a lot of changes to the aircraft stat card, simply because the aircraft has probably the most complicated combat style in any of the other vehicles in War Thunder. There is no other vehicle that you have to, say, side climb for. There's no other thing that quite differs from a plane. There's no rope-a-doping in tanks. There's a 3-dimensional fight that goes on. And this is something that I would like to see represented in the stat card. I'm having a current look at the MiG-21 SMT right now, and I don't see enough information to, give me a rough idea of how the plane performs. I can see how it does with true airspeed at 1,300 meters or 13,000 meters, but it doesn't give me a good indication of how the plane performs at sea level, how it performs in a climb, how it performs at all. And honestly, these are things that I shouldn't have to fly in a test flight for. I should see them straight off the stat card. I'd really like to see things like thrust to weight ratio, which is actually on the developer's sort of test server, which I don't understand why it hasn't been translated to the real game, to the live game. I would also like to see a sort of slider, kind of the way I discussed with tanks and speed. I'd like to see its maximum speed on the deck. I'd like to see its maximum speed at altitude. I would like to see its maximum speed anywhere. It's energy retention. Things like these statistics. Obviously, I'm not entirely sure if there is a number for energy retention or a unit or something like that, but I would like to see a little slider, like the way I described for tanks. You set the speed, you set the altitude, and it will give you your maximum speed. You set the engine power, and it'll give you your maximum speed. Maybe I'd like to see, I don't know, fuel consumption with afterburner on. Things like this, which I would have to data mine for, I don't have to anymore because they're on the stat card. And these are things that I would really love to see. On top of that, for the air-to-air missiles, I would also like to see performance at low altitude and performance at high altitude. Much like I said, they are rocket propelled, so they'll even have different velocities in terms of their Mach number. So these are things that I would just love to have in the game, because they would give me a much better indication of the performance of my vehicle. The turn time is probably the biggest misleading information out there for War Thunder stat cards. I'd really love to see a more specific turn time. For example, the turn time that you currently see on the stat card is for rudder turn times. I would much rather see that and a turn time with elevator included. I would also like to see any statistic that you could possibly give me. Maximum landing gear deployed times, maximum landing gear and flap deploy speeds, absolute do not exceed speeds, things like that I would also have to go to the forums to have a look for. I would also have to dig for them, and not only that, these statistics don't often get released until a couple months after the plane gets released. And so I'd really like to see something like that on the stat card. It doesn't have to be as detailed as the stat card on the forums, but it certainly can be a little bit more detailed than it is now, because let's face it, a new player who's trying to get good doesn't really spend time on the forums. They spend time playing the game. And playing the game is where they should be finding a lot of their information. Obviously, not like guides on how to, but information about the vehicle itself. I think this would be a much better way to introduce a brand new player to War Thunder. It's such a steep learning curve. Learning this game for me is a 6,000 hour process, and I'm still learning. And so imagine what a brand new player must be going through. It must be difficult without proper information. You'll look at a Horton 229, for example, that doesn't actually have a tail rudder. It has like a little wing slat that it pops out, or some sort of spoiler rather, that pops out and acts as the rudder. It has a huge rudder turn time, but since it's labeled as turn time, then people will think, oh, the Horton 229 can't turn. They'll go to turn with it, and they'll realize that it can indeed turn. And this I find to be extremely misleading. But regardless, I think the stat card is okay for now, but I would really love to see a big improvement. And I think this sort of thing is perfect for new players, perfect for veteran players, and basically perfect for anyone who wants to know a little bit more about their plane. Anyway, ladies and gents, I hope you really enjoyed this video. Let me know about your thoughts in the comments below. I want to start a discussion about this and perhaps put a post on the forums. Anyway, ladies and gents, thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you next time.